Who would have guessed that Skeleton Crew, of all shows, would end up being a standout for starfighter combat? Well, it was. The show looked great, and the season, perhaps series finale, gave us a great look at one of the most underutilized fan-favorite starfighters in the entire franchise, the B-Wing.
5 housemates will battle it out on X2 Big Brother. Tune in tonight at 8:30 p.m. EST.
I think everyone knows the story of how the B-Wing was designed for Return of the Jedi, but technical issues prevented it from really shining. Well, Skeleton Crew showed us a pair of B-Wings absolutely unleashing on the pirate flagship with their beam weapon. Now, I've had a lot of questions about this, and people have asked, is this a violation of existing Star Wars lore? And no, but I understand why those questions exist. So, in Star Wars Rebels, we see the Rebel Lions get their hands on the first prototype B-Wing. This was a vessel created by Quarry on the planet Shantipole, and it's really well known for an awesome scene where it breaks an Imperial blockade with what is essentially a little starfighter-sized super laser. Now, when that appeared in Star Wars Rebels, people were left wondering, why is the laser not brought out more if it's that effective? I mean, this thing shreds an Imperial cruiser. The general explanation, at least the one that I've usually read, is that although the prototype was capable of housing the composite beam weapon, generally it was too expensive and impractical to have the weapon in the production model B-Wing, which is why we see them instead more routinely armed with laser cannons, auto blasters, ion cannons, and even missile launchers. However, while it is true we never saw the Quarry composite cannon on mass-produced B-Wings, nor really any weapon of that power, it seems like the general technology has trickled down into a more production-friendly model. This was shown most prominently in Star Wars Squadrons, which actually gave the B-Wing 2 different beam variants. And Squadrons is actually a pretty cool portrayal of the B-Wing. It's so unique because as a large fighter, it's essentially a test bed for whatever sort of weapons you want. In the game, for example, the B-Wing can fire both ion lasers and regular lasers, and while all the bombers can actually use the regular beam weapon, the B-Wing's version is significantly different and also comes with a variant which does ion-only damage. Unfortunately, in Star Wars Squadrons, anyone who played competitively probably remembers, the B-Wing wasn't really viable, and a lot of that just came down to tuning. Although it was decently fast in a straight line, it was not very maneuverable, it was quite clunky even with the gyroscope feature, and it just didn't have the shields or the firepower necessary to really be the capital ship killer it should and could have been. However, that didn't come down to issues with the ship's design, just the numbers weren't right. Outside of Squadrons, which of course is canon, the B-Wing's 2 unique beam weapons are actually pretty cool, and they represent a difference in fighter design philosophy compared to pretty much everything else we see. Ordinarily, you don't see laser or energy-based ion weaponry used to disable a capital ship or eventually destroy it. Yes, lasers can tear away at larger vessels, but typically, lasers are primarily for anti-fighter defense, while munitions, whether bombs, torpedoes, or missiles, inflict the heavy damage. So, for example, in Rogue One, when you see the Y-Wings do a run on the Star Destroyer disabling the shields, they're not using their ion weapons, which Y-Wings could be outfitted with, rather they were using ion torpedoes. Typically, even B-Wings would then use proton torpedoes or other powerful weapons rather than any form of laser to inflict the killing blow on capital ships. If you've played Star Wars Squadrons, or if you've played TIE Fighter or X-Wing, you probably can understand intrinsically the benefits of having pure munition weapons versus a composite beam weapon which is powered by the ship's internal energy source. Now, obviously in Star Wars, these vessels are powered by minuscule, at least comparatively, reactors. They can perform incredible feats while powering shields, engines, and lasers, but these energy sources aren't infinite. Munitions have the destructive power primed and ready. They don't need much from the ship's reactor, just enough to fire the missile or drop the bomb. What that means is even if you've got all energy diverted to your shields and your engines, you can still launch a proton torpedo or an ion bomb. The benefits of that should be obvious, and again, if you've played Squadrons, sometimes when attacking the Star Destroyer, you want all energy in your engines, so it's nice to still be able to get a shot off. However, that's not to say that there's no benefit to having the weaponry tied into the ship's systems itself. If you put more power to laser cannons, they're going to do more damage to an enemy starfighter. Similarly, if you've got a composite beam weapon and you're shunting all of your energy into that, presumably it's going to do a lot more damage. And if you watch the scene where the New Republic takes out the pirate ship, they're really facing very little resistance. You can full on gun it, full power to weapons, and that might be more damaging than a bomb. A laser also, as we see in the scene, offers a lot of precision. Where a proton torpedo might explode against the hull, maybe even sending debris back towards the starfighter, the laser just cuts clean through, critically damaging internal components, which may be better at taking out a ship's internal systems. I don't think the composite beam weapon would have been stock loadout for the B-Wing, but I think there are some situations where there's clearly a benefit. I've mentioned some of the drawbacks. I think there's probably an immense power usage. It could render the B-Wing not very functional afterwards even, but I also don't think it's an ideal weapon against any sort of vessel which will fight back. One of the benefits of a proton torpedo, again, if you've played Squadrons, you'll know this, you can launch it and leave. If the B-Wing wants sustained damage, which it's going to need to take out a target, it's gotta remain facing at it and it's gotta fly in a pretty predictable direction. So good against pirates, good against very weak vessels, maybe not ideal against a Star Destroyer. Anyway, those are my thoughts. Always nice when we get to talk a bit of Star Wars Squadrons. Before ending the video though, I will answer one community question. If you'd like to have yours featured in a future video, perhaps leave it below with the hashtag AskEck. William asks, so what were the Imperial warlords like under Imperial rule after the peace accords with the New Republic? Were they treated the same way most worlds were during the Galactic Civil War, or far differently? Well, as a matter of fact, there weren't really very many prominent Imperial warlords remaining by the time of the peace accords in 19 ABY. Most of them had been dealt with either by the New Republic or Natasi Dala, but any which hadn't folded into the Imperial remnant were probably fairly rebellious and would not have followed the peace accords outright. The thing is, most of the warlords still remaining at that point would have been very diminished in power. You did have some factions like the Second Imperium, which were made out partially of old warlords, but those usually are produced essentially by stories which wanted to fit into the timeline but couldn't be the Empire outright. If you guys are interested, maybe that's something I can look into in a future video because I'm sure there are other examples. Finally, before I go, I'm going to encourage you guys to check out my friend Howie Day's work. He just released a new scene he's working on featuring some B-Wings, which I thought was very appropriate considering the topic of today's video, so I'll also link that down below, but I'll see you guys next time. Goodbye.